Marley, what happened here in Nashville that day?
It was awesome. It was amazing. There were body-to-body people all the way from Legislative Plaza all the way down to the riverfront. The march was incredible, and it really helped people to see. It gave a face to the movement, and it was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful.
So to give you a little context, why did all those people show up on May 1st, 2006? Like millions of people, right? The biggest MayDay mobilizations in the country's history, I think. So there was a bill in Congress to deport all those people, right? This is a federal bill. And so if you ask around, in places where there's established immigration movements, LA, New York, you ask around who started that, sometimes people have an answer. Because they say, oh, is that coalition? Or is that group of people, they've been working on this for years. Most places around the country, nobody has an answer. Nobody knows who started it. In Salt Lake, where we were at the time, it was like, well, people on the radio started talking about it. They said people have been gathering in Chicago. There were 100,000 people in Chicago demanding immigration reform last week. I guess we should do the same, and they're saying May 1st is the day. That's what they tell you in Salt Lake if you ask, how did this start? So it wasn't like a group of 10 communists out there saying, how can we bring down the system? Let's recruit everyone. It was everybody was in the same situation and started talking, right? Obviously with some organizational help with people that had done that for a long time. Here in Nashville, if you ask around, why did people do that on May 1st, 2006? Sometimes you hear about the federal immigration bill, but sometimes you hear that's the year they were taking away our driver's licenses. We'd been able to get driver's licenses so that we could get to work, and that year they were taking them away. So we decided we were going to go defend our right to have identification. Don't necessarily hear about a federal immigration bill, but that was one of the things that really made the movement big, right? We'll hear a little bit more about the immigration aspects of May Day tonight. But I just wanted to add that in as a context of why is this something that's building on this day over the last 6 years in the US. And those million people gathering in LA and those 500,000 people gathering in Chicago on May Day 6 years ago are a big reason why. So we're gonna do a little bit more of going around, because one of the things that's really what's significant about this history, right, is that we live in a society right now where some people have okay jobs. Some people have health care, some people get overtime if they work over 40 hours a week. Most people don't feel like they have to compete in applying for a job with a 13-year-old or a 10-year-old and competing for the same job, and the 10-year-old will get paid half the wage, and so that child will get hired on instead of you. That's what was happening in 1886, right?
It's happening now overseas.
Yeah. It's happening now overseas. It's happening some here still.
Called internships.
A lot of people have Social Security. A lot of people have workplace safety regulations. A lot of people have workers' comp. But, so let me explain. My name is Tristan, by the way. I do a lot of work in town with a group called the Workers' Dignity Project, which is mostly immigrant workers. When we go around the circle and we ask who gets workers' comp, and we ask who gets overtime, and we ask who has health care on their job, people laugh. They say, what are you talking about? When we ask, what's the minimum wage, people say, whatever they'll pay you, right? When they say, who does labor law protect in this country, they say, I don't know, right? So for context, there's a lot of people that don't have those things. So the question here I have, has anybody here ever worked a job where they didn't get overtime? So these days we have to explain what overtime is sometimes. You're supposed to get paid 150% of your hourly wage. So if I get paid $5 an hour, I'm supposed to get paid $7.50 an hour for the 41st hour I work that week, right? If I get paid $10 an hour, I get paid $15 for my 41st hour, right? So a lot of people don't know that even, because that doesn't even apply sometimes. Who here has worked in a job where they didn't get overtime pay? I have. Okay. Who here has worked in a job where they didn't have health care coverage? Okay. Who here has worked on a job where if you get injured, you don't know whether your hospital bills are going to be covered? Yeah? So the question is, why don't we have those things? I mean, that was like a third to half, maybe half of the people here have said they've worked in some of those jobs. Maybe some of the people here have never had a job where you got all of those things. So the question is, why don't we have those if supposedly we won all of those in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and 60s? Anybody have an answer of why we don't get those things?
Contractors.
What is it?
Contractors.
Contractors. Do you want to explain that?
Yeah, you're hired on a per piece basis or a production basis, and you're hired for a certain amount. You have to take care of your own taxes. You have to take care of your own insurance. You have to take care of everything. And in a lot of situations, you're misclassified as a contractor when you should be classified as a W-2 worker. It's a way for the bosses to get around paying that extra little bit. That one boss told me that it would have cost $200 extra a month to put me on W-2, and he didn't want to come up with $200 extra a month. You know, and this was a concern that probably grossed, I would guess, it was a small business, but it probably grossed $20 million a year.
Who here has worked in a job where they were misclassified as a contractor so that the boss could pay them less?
1099. 1099.
Yep, 1099.
1099. Have you ever got a 1099?
When we go around this in the Workers' Dignity Project, everyone raises their hand to that question, right? What are some other reasons why we don't have that, Michael?
Two main reasons. One, a lot of us don't even know our rights when it comes to working. And two, we don't express our desire to have them. If we are willing to work for minimum wage, 42 hours a week, and not demand our health care and not demand our overtime, they're not going to just give it to us. So I believe a lot of it has to do with keeping the masses ignorant as to what their rights are.
Well, it also has to do with the reserve army of labor too. The more labor there is out there, the more competition for individual jobs, and the less organization there is in the working class, the more that owners and bosses can screw us over.
So this is a really important point, right? This is maybe a little obvious, but I think it's really worth pointing out. Who here has ever been scared when they were applying for a job because they were worried somebody else might get it instead? Who has ever felt that way? That's amazing. It's obvious, right? But it's amazing in a society that has enough that most of us have felt scared applying for a job because someone else might get it. If you think like hard about that. So what he means, right, by the reserve army of labor, lots of people don't have jobs, and so they can reduce all of our benefits and our wages because someone else will do it for less, right?
And you can't complain about it because if you do, you're fired and they pull one of those other people in.
And this is really important to understand as a strategy. If you ask an economist, I took an economics class when I was a sophomore in college in Utah, and they taught us that there is a optimal level of unemployment. Why did they think there was an optimal level? That means it's not zero.
Right.
All right? Full employment is not the goal for an economist, and this is what they taught us, right? You want to have an unemployment level, I think they put it at between like 5 and 12%, that this is the optimal level. And the reason, of course, why was that helps keep wages at what they called an efficient level, right? So in understanding the strategy of creating unemployment in order to scare people that have jobs and people that are applying for jobs, right? Katie, did you have something? We want to make sure everybody gets the chance to speak, so if you've spoken, just wait until other people have. And then we'll do Katie and then Warren.
Well, I was going to talk about, I guess I should maybe just bring out ways that our society still currently uses forms of slave labor, like forcing people in prisons to work for little or no wages. I think that's one example of something that happens. But I was also thinking of ways that the labor movements in the past were so incredible, but in a lot of ways we thought we could build sort of a barrier around our own country and improve conditions within it, and not worry about what conditions were like outside of that country. And what we've seen is that factories can then just go to places where there haven't been labor movement, or where the labor movements have been massacred or something like that. And so that again hurts us. So sort of maybe this idea of how could we do this globally so that there's no out to source to, you know?
It's all based on an economic system that's based on production for profit, and an ideology that says that's the best kind of system available. And it's one of the things you're going to have to basically address, is whether or not you can build any kind of a society, decent society, on the base of capitalism.
Yep.
But let me ask one other category. Is there anybody here that ever worked for free for 6 weeks to get a job? There was a story on NPR today of I believe in Maine or New Hampshire, where the deal was that employers would bring you on, let you work for 6 weeks, and then decide whether or not they would hire you. Now, you were getting unemployment, but essentially you were working for free. So things have gotten so bad that we have to work for free. We have to pay people to come into the town to give us jobs. We have to give them tax breaks. All sorts of things.
And if they move.
One of the things Katie just mentioned, which I think is worth bringing up as we see inmate labor walking past us. The end of the first week of Occupy Nashville downtown, they were setting up for the Southern Festival of Books. I don't know if people remember that. This was back in October. And the people that set up for the Southern Festival of Books were inmates from the county jail. They were bringing in hay bales and benches and setting up tents. So we had extra donuts, and it was raining really hard, and I took the donuts over to some of those inmates. And they were hungry, and they're like, cool, donuts, great. So I asked them some questions while they were hiding around the corner, like trying to make sure the sheriff wasn't watching them snack. And I said, do you guys get paid for this? And they laughed, of course. They're like, let me tell you how it works. Some people here, I apologize if this is an old story to you. This was a new story to me. They said how this works is if you get a 30-day sentence and you work without pay, you can get out in 15. If you get a 60-day sentence and you work without pay for 30 days, you can get out. They double your time if you don't work for free. I was told, well, the problem is I get really bad allergies. I'm speaking as the person telling me, right? He said, I get bad allergies, and they were putting me on landscaping on the side of the highway. That's really tough for me. I said, I can't do it. I had to stay in jail for 60 days instead of 30 because of that. So if you see prison labor being used to displace other workers, understand it as a strategy. There's one story that's really key here in Tennessee history, right? Some people know this story really well. I don't quite as well. Here, in the coal mines, not even far in East Tennessee, but like 1 hour from here, east of here, there was a lot of coal mining in the 1890s. And those coal miners were usually white. They were usually immigrants. They considered themselves minorities and oppressed minorities, but they were white, and in that sense were treated quite a bit better than the former slaves of Tennessee. But those miners, when they decided to organize for better conditions and they went on strike, what the bosses decided is, wait a minute, all those people that got emancipated in 1863, 1864, 1865, all those people, we could just put them back in jail, and they wouldn't have to call them slaves. We just put them in jail for not having jobs. These are called vagrancy laws, right? Put them in jail for not having jobs, and then once they're in jail, we'll make chain gangs and they'll go work the mines.
Still doing it.
And we'll break the coal miners union by sending out convict lease labor from the prisons. We'll get money for the prison. The warden gets money from the mine operator, and they operate the mines while the workers are out on strike, right? In this case, it was a pretty good story. The white workers that were on strike said, wait a minute, if they're in chains, we can't win. So they went, they burned down the prison, cut the chains, put them on a train, and said, you guys are free. They did that all through 1890 and 1891, all across East Tennessee, okay? It's an amazing story, you should check it out. But that was a story where solidarity really came through. Not necessarily because there wasn't racism, not necessarily because everybody was nice to each other, but because they recognized they were pretty much in the same boat if they didn't work together to some degree, right? Anybody want to share a story about that?
A little bit on what he said earlier too, about fear addressing employers that are treating you unfairly, or fear in getting the job. You know, one of the things that helps to create that fear is all these right-to-work laws that they've been passing lately. I mean, how big of a misnomer is that? Right-to-work laws that basically prevent you from having disagreements with your employers.
So what does a right-to-work law do? What can employers do?
Fire at will.
Maybe you want to say that louder?
Fire at will.
Fire at will, pretty much, yeah.
Can't hardly fire.
So, this is another big answer to the question, why, if supposedly we have laws for workers' compensation, supposedly healthcare is something you can get with jobs, supposedly we have overtime and laws protecting it, why don't we have those things? Here's another big reason, right? Laws that were passed to allow employers to fire you. Now, is it legal? This is a good question. Is it legal if you work 60 hours in a week and they don't pay you overtime and you complain and they fire you? Is that legal for an employer to do in Tennessee?
Yes.
Anyone?
I don't know if that's actually legal, but you've got to take it on.
Right.
That's the thing. You've got to take it on.
So this
isn't
isn't
legal
go
for
ahead.
them to fire you.
Right.
But you have the right to pursue them for damages.
Right.
So this is a really interesting point, right? So there's laws against retaliatory firing.
Right.
But who investigates that? So this is something we run into a lot. Again, from my experience working with the Workers' Dignity Project. The Department of Labor, Wages and Hours Board, etc. They're the ones that investigate this stuff. Does anybody know how many people, how many investigators the Department of Labor has for the state of Tennessee?
One for every 175,000 low-wage workers.
One for every 175,000 workers.
That's being overworked.
Right? So the question then is, why don't we have these things? There's a specific strategy to cripple any enforcement of these laws that we might have had,
It's
right?
set up for the bosses. The entire system is set up for the bosses to make money, not for us to do anything about it. That's the whole, to me, that is the whole problem. The entire system is set up for the bosses, not for the workers.
So does anybody that hasn't spoken yet have an idea of some other reason why we don't get these things that we're supposed to have legally?